Amelia insists that I give birth to a son before she'll let me get married. But my fiancé, Jacob, keeps finding excuses every night. I can't help it. I have to do what Amelia wants. I went to a remote town to get fertility shots. My car broke down on a dark country road. I was sweating with pain. I quickly called Jacob for help, but he said he was at the office. In fact, he was at the movies with his childhood sweetheart, Sophia. In desperation, I had to call Jacob's brother-in-law, Ethan. Unexpectedly, when Jacob found out, not only did he not care about my physical condition, but he suspected that I wanted to get close to his brother. He even laughed at me for being so whimsical. I had no choice but to drive to a remote town by myself. I went to the village doctor to get the fertility injection. The village doctor lifted the torn cloth curtain at the entrance and walked in. He was wearing a white coat stained with mud and a cigarette in his hand. He took out his medical instruments and was about to give me the injection. I coughed twice and asked hesitantly, "Don't you need to sterilize these instruments first?" The village doctor looked a little impatient and frowned. "Why so much trouble? Are you going to give me the injection or not?" I hesitated for a moment, thinking about my situation in my in-laws' home. I didn't want to go against Amelia's wishes. In the end, I gave in. The rusty needle pierced my skin. The pain made me break out in a cold sweat. The village doctor was a bit rough when treating the wound. It caused the wound to ooze some more blood. After taking a photo of Amelia as evidence, I endured the pain and fastened my seat belt. I started the car. This road was a country lane. It was full of potholes. Every time the car bumped, the seat belt would rub against the wound. I gripped the steering wheel. My knuckles turned white. Cold sweat ran down my forehead. When we passed a large pothole, the car lurched. The wheels sank in. I tried everything, but the car still broke down. There were no street lamps in the area. It got darker and darker. It was pitch black. I was scared. I wanted Jacob to help. I called 8 times. Jacob finally answered. I said, "Jacob, my car has broken down. Can you come and pick me up?" The voice on the other end of the line sounded gentle and reassuring. "Are you okay? I'm a bit tied up here. Can you contact a towing company yourself?" Jacob had always been good to me. Since he was busy with something, I didn't want to cause him any trouble. So I agreed. I didn't realize how remote the place was. Even the towing company refused to come. It was completely silent. It was so dark that I couldn't see anything. That incident, when I was little, made me especially afraid of the dark. Now my phone battery was only at 10%. I anxiously looked through my contacts, but I couldn't find anyone who could help. Finally, I dialed Ethan's number. He was the head of the Smith family, Jacob's uncle-in-law. He was the only one who wouldn't treat me coldly. I held the phone a little nervously. After all, I only knew my brother-in-law from nodding hello. I was surprised that the call went through as soon as I dialed. There was a noise in the receiver. It sounded as if he was in a meeting, but soon it quieted down. Ethan's voice was low. He asked, puzzled, "Hello, why didn't you say anything? My car suddenly broke down. I can't find a tow truck to help. For some reason, I feel sad." I held back the tears. My voice was starting to crack. Ethan heard the chair opposite him crash to the floor. His breathing became rapid. He asked, "Are you hurt? Send me your location. I'll come over. If you're scared, don't hang up." I didn't hang up. I stared silently at the screen where Ethan's name was displayed. He was on the other end of the line, organizing everything methodically. From time to time, he gave me a little reassurance. He kept the phone pressed to his ear. The sound of his breathing was especially loud in the empty car. My heart gradually calmed down. I drifted off. It wasn't until the phone turned off automatically that I realized the battery was dead. I was completely in the dark. The wound hurt so much. I leaned against the chair and fell asleep. I had that dream again. I was crouching in the dark. I couldn't find the door. I couldn't see myself either. I was so scared. I felt the darkness like a monster. It was going to swallow me up. When I grew up, I understood. It wasn't a dream. After my mother died, the day my stepmother came to the house, my father locked me in a small dark room. I don't know what I did wrong, but I cried and begged for forgiveness. I only remember vaguely. When they thought of me, I had fainted from hunger. The door suddenly opened. Blinding sunlight poured into the dark room. I slowly opened my eyes. Ethan's magnified face was in front of me. He was shouting my name. He always paid attention to his appearance, but now he was full of anxiety. His tie was crooked. Mud stains were on his expensive custom-made suit. I called out to him. I was worried that it was just my illusion. This was the first time I called out his name. He was a little stunned. I came back to my senses and called out to my brother-in-law again. Ethan looked at me and saw that I was fine. He returned to his usual indifferent expression. He said, "I'm glad you're not hurt. Go wait in my car." The atmosphere in the car was a bit dull. Ethan spoke first. He picked up a bottle of water, unscrewed the cap, and handed it to me. He asked, "Why did you come here alone?" I looked at his knobby hands. I froze for a moment before taking it. My face felt a little hot. I quickly took a sip of water. I told him the whole story. Ethan frowned. He said in a cold tone, "Couldn't you just refuse?" I lowered my head. I didn't know how to answer. I can only choose to marry Jacob now. How dare I disobey Amelia's wishes? Ethan didn't ask any further questions. He turned the air conditioning to a comfortable temperature, then leaned back in his seat. He closed his eyes. He said, "The car is out of gas. Let's take a break. We'll wait for help." I looked at his profile. A feeling of warmth welled up in my heart. He was afraid I would be scared. Is that why he rushed over here? "Thank you," I whispered. After about an hour, the rescue team finally arrived. As soon as I turned on my phone, I received a barrage of calls and messages from Jacob. He asked me where I was and why I hadn't gone home yet. I thought he was waiting for me at home, but I ran into him as soon as I stepped outside. Jacob was standing next to a girl with curly hair. She was smiling and asking him how the movie was. Jacob gently patted her head. He said tenderly, "Whatever Sophia picks is sure to be good." I stopped in my tracks. Ethan glanced down at me. I had to keep up with him. Jacob and I exchanged glances. He quickly withdrew his hand. The atmosphere suddenly became quiet. The girl next to him looked at me. She broke the silence first. "You must be the sister-in-law." "I'm Sophia." She smiled at me, a little embarrassed. "I just returned to China today. I asked my brother Jacob to accompany me to the movies. I hope you won't be offended." Sister-in-law, so Jacob was accompanying her to the movies. I shook my head. I forced a smile. Ethan sneered. Staring at Jacob, he said, "Your fiancé is in danger, and you're at the movies." Although the two of them weren't that far apart in age, but Jacob is particularly afraid of his brother-in-law, who is superior to him in every way. He comes over, takes my hand, and says, "Why didn't you tell me about this earlier? You made your brother-in-law worry." I stand there, at a loss, feeling a little embarrassed. Ethan puts away his phone, says briefly, "I've made an appointment for you with the doctor. We'll go for the checkup tomorrow." Back in the room, Jacob puts away his smile, complains, "Why did you bother bothering my brother-in-law? You got me in trouble." I lowered my head. I pinched my fingertips. I whispered and explained what happened today. After listening to Jacob, he reached out and touched my head. He said, "There's no rush to get married. Relationships need to be nurtured slowly. I'll talk to Amelia." My eyes dimmed. I shook my head lightly. He said to Amelia, "In the end, I'm the one who suffers. Amelia will only think that I'm against her. When did you become so close to my brother-in-law? You're obviously not hurt. He even arranged for a doctor to see you." Jacob put his arms around me. He said, "You're getting too close to him. It makes me unhappy." I thought about how he had spent the day with Sophia, watching a movie, and completely ignored my pleas for help. This time I didn't try to appease him as I had in the past. I was a little tired. "Go to sleep." Jacob froze for a moment, but he didn't say anything. I dragged my tired body into the bathroom. I stared at my slightly reddened eyes in the mirror. I knew in my heart, even if Jacob sensed that I cared about Sophia, as long as I didn't bring it up, he wouldn't mention it. The next day, I packed a few things. I was going to the hospital. When I reached the door, I was stopped by Amelia. It seems that Jacob had still found Amelia. Amelia sat in the living room, slowly sipping her tea. I let out a small sigh. I stood obediently in front of her. Amelia looked up at me. Her gaze was sharp. "You told Jacob on me. You said I forced you to have a child." I was a little tired. I told her what had happened again. Amelia gave a disgusted snort. She rolled her eyes. She said, "I told you to go for your own good. You can't even do something simple right. You're no match for Sophia in any way." I looked down at my feet, without saying a word. Amelia, however, was not about to let up. She pursued the matter. Jacob said, "You and Ethan are very close. I'm not saying this to criticize you. A girl has to know how to protect herself. Don't always want to get involved with other people. It's not a big deal. You don't need to go to the hospital. Just heat up the 3 bowls of medicine at home today and drink them." I looked in the direction she was pointing. There were 3 bowls of strange-colored liquid on the table. I thought of Ethan's earlier rejection. I tried to communicate with her. Jacob said, "There's no rush to get married. He wants to go to work first." Amelia didn't expect him to reject her. Her eyes immediately widened. Her tone became sharp. Work. I'm telling you, don't even think about it. You're not Sophia. Going out will only make people laugh, she said. This is a recipe I found someone to make. You've had the fertility injection. If you drink this, and you'll have a son. She obviously saw me as nothing more than a breeding machine, but I couldn't refuse. I had to stay at home. The concoction gave off an unpleasant smell when heated, and there were some residue in it. Amelia stood there with her arms folded, watching me. She didn't leave until I had finished the whole bowl. Then she left. Satisfied. Maybe it was the effect of the medicine. I felt dizzy. My body was hot. I went back to my room and fell asleep soon after in my dream. I fell into a bottomless pit. I woke up in a panic. It was dark outside the window. My head was throbbing. I felt like vomiting. I wanted to go to the hospital. But as soon as I got out of bed, I fell. Slowly, my consciousness became more and more blurry. I struggled to find my phone. I dialed Jacob's number. This time, he answered quickly. I heard the barking of a puppy on the other end of the line, and Sophia's clear voice. Jacob's brother. Let's get this puppy. MMHM, if Sophia likes it, he said. And then he remembered me. Aren't you at home today? What's wrong? I gasped for breath. My chest hurt a little. I don't feel well. Can you help me? If you don't feel well, go to the hospital. I'll tell Amelia she can take you. No, I rejected immediately. I'll go by myself. Okay, you be careful. Take care of yourself. The calls suddenly cut out. Jacob hung up. I was lying on the floor, breathing heavily. Tears kept falling on the floor. They were choosing puppies. I also had a puppy. My mother left it to me. It accompanied me for many years. I took it to the Smiths. I thought it would be a free world for both of us. But it wasn't. Amelia didn't like the puppy at all. She said she was getting ready to have a baby, so she gave the puppy away. That time, I tried to stop her, but Amelia got really angry. She had the puppy put to sleep. At that time, Jacob didn't say anything. After the puppy died, I hit rock bottom. I started to learn to accept and obey. Don't be sad. Amelia did it for your own good in the future. We can get another one together. They wouldn't let me go to work. They wouldn't let me go out and make friends. As a result, I didn't even have a single friend. I held onto the edge of the bed. I tried to stand up. I walked unsteadily to the stairs. Suddenly, my head started to buzz. Everything became blurry, just as I thought I was going to fall. Someone embraced me. It felt so warm. He whispered to me, "Don't be afraid, hang on a little longer. I'll take you to the hospital." It was Ethan. I leaned against his chest, listening to his fast heartbeat from nervousness. I fell asleep peacefully. After waking up in the hospital room, I secretly observed. I noticed that Ethan's clothes were a little wrinkled. He was wearing headphones and nodded from time to time. I felt very uncomfortable. I always felt that Jacob was the best for me, but he repeatedly hurt me. On the contrary, I thought Ethan was cold and distant. I never imagined that he had saved my life so many times. Ethan saw that I was awake. He immediately called the meeting to an end. Then he hurried over to my bedside. He helped me raise the hospital bed. He put a pillow behind my back and handed me a cup of warm water. The doctor said you were poisoned. Are you feeling better now? Do you still feel like vomiting? Don't you know that drugs can affect each other? Why did you drink so much? If you wait any longer, it will be too late to save you. Do you understand? I listened to his seemingly stern but actually caring words. My eyes couldn't help but fill with tears. They fell like broken beads. Ethan didn't expect me to cry. He panicked. He held the cup in one hand. With the other, he hastily pulled out a tissue. He looked a little at a loss for words. "Don't cry. I'm not blaming you." He put down the cup and gently wiped away my tears. "Have you been here all night with me?" Jacob stood in the doorway holding a fruit basket. Ethan didn't look at him. He handed me the warm water. I didn't want to deal with Jacob either. I just slowly drank my drink. Jacob smiled awkwardly. He tried to put the fruit basket away. Ethan glanced at it, frowned, and threw all the bananas in the basket into the trash. "Don't you know she's allergic to bananas?" Jacob froze, so did I. Jacob gently licked his lips. He said, "I'm sorry. I really didn't know. I'll be more careful next time." This sentence sounded familiar. It was because of the banana allergy. I had already told Jacob before. Jacob still handed me a banana. Amelia was there. I had to reluctantly eat it. Later, I went to my aunt to get medicine for my allergy. It happened that Ethan had returned. He asked casually, unexpectedly. He had remembered the whole thing. "Little brother-in-law, you've worked hard. I'll take care of her. You go back and rest for a while." Ethan didn't say much. He just gave Jacob a warning look. After he left, the room fell silent again. Jacob peeled the apple while pretending to ask casually, You and little brother-in-law are pretty close. I asked expressionlessly, in a calm tone. Yesterday, where were you? Jacob stopped what he was doing and asked. I had some work at the office yesterday. What's wrong? I told you to let Amelia take you to the hospital, but you refused. I looked down and stopped at his hands. I saw the new couple's rings from C Family this year. I couldn't help but ask, is buying a dog with Sophia more important than my life? This was the first time I had directly exposed his lie. The smile on his face couldn't hold back anymore. Sophia is my younger sister. You're fine. Don't be childish. He actually thinks I'm being childish. I close my eyes. Exhausted, I say, Jacob, let's call off the engagement. The apple in his hand falls to the ground. He looks shocked. Are you trying to scare me? I've made myself clear. Sophia is my younger sister. Or, you're having an affair with my brother-in-law. You think I'm not as good as him. I really can't understand it, and I don't want to respond to him. Jacob stood up. He paced the room angrily. You take that as a yes. Where would I go if you left me, someone like my brother-in-law? You think you're suitable. Don't think about things that are unrealistic. I never thought Jacob would say such things. The sudden ringing of the phone interrupted our conversation. He answered it and called out softly, Sophia, I promised to go shopping with you today. I remember, don't worry, Jacob didn't even look at me. He turned around, slammed the door and left. I felt very ironic in my heart. Jacob has always been a gentle and considerate person, but compared to Ethan, I just realized. He only says nice things, only to people he really likes. He will only take action, whether it is facing industry suppression or the plight of the homeless. He just talks. I don't want to be stuck in this swamp anymore. After checking out of the hospital, I went back to the Smith's house to pack my things. He asked me, where are you going? Ethan occasionally stays at the old mansion. He still smells fresh from the shower. I dragged my suitcase behind me and smiled at him, saying, thanks to my brother-in-law for taking care of me. I'm going to break off the engagement with Jacob, so I won't be living here anymore. Ethan looks a little surprised. You chose him, didn't you like him? No. My eyes grow dull. It was my father. I didn't have a choice after my mother died. I felt like I was being ignored like air. After my stepmother gave birth to my younger brother, I didn't even have the chance to be chosen and respected. I could only be like a puppet being manipulated. Before, I was worried about facing the outside world alone. In retrospect, the outside world may be the place where I can truly be free. I had expected Ethan to persuade me, or at least say something polite, but he didn't. Instead, he seemed in a good mood. He just asked me, do you have anywhere to go? I have a spare room. You can stay here for now. Take your time finding a place. I really don't have anywhere to go. Then I'll trouble you, brother-in-law. You can call me Ethan. He picked up my suitcase and turned to go downstairs. Ethan's home was decorated in simple colors, mainly black, white, and gray, but there were some interesting little decorations. He said, if you get bored, you can go look in the study. I'll be out for a while. The bookshelves in the study were full of books. My eyes were drawn to a blue notebook. When I pulled it out, several photos fell out. I didn't want to peek. I was about to put everything back. But then I froze. This photo, is that me? I looked through it curiously. I found that all these photos were of me when I was at school. There were photos of me receiving awards and giving speeches. They were all moments that made me proud. I was also an all-round excellent student. I was often on the honor roll, but no one paid attention to that. After a slight hesitation, I opened the notebook anyway. I looked through the handwriting and solutions inside. The more I looked, the more familiar it looked. Could it be him? That year, after my mother passed away, my grades plummeted. It was then that a user named Y entered my life, with Whitekes patient help. I started studying again. The content of the lessons I had missed was written down by Y, stroke by stroke, and sent to me in photos, but I never knew his real name. He silently accompanied me for several years, until I graduated. Later, my father arranged for me to marry Jacob. My teenage heartache came to an end. I completely deleted the app. Thinking about this, my hands trembled a little. I downloaded the app again. The top contact Y showed the last 2 unread messages. I like you. I'm Ethan. My heart was beating fast. It was like going back to that time as a teenager. My heart was full of fluttering feelings. It turned out we had met again. It turns out, I've found what I've lost. I put the notebook back where I found it. Then I picked up a book and put it on the table, but I couldn't enjoy it for long. My father called. You have to marry into the Smiths. We've signed the contract. I struggled to resist. I shouted, I'm a person, not an object. You have no choice. Even if you renounce the marriage, I will bring you back. Just try it. When Ethan came back, he was carrying the groceries he had just bought. He put a pair of fluffy bunny slippers next to my feet and asked, "What are you thinking about?" After I found out that he was Ethan, I felt a little embarrassed when I looked at him again. I didn't want to make him worry. "I'm not thinking about anything. I'm just reading a book." Ethan picked up the book and turned it around. He laughed and said, "Are you reading a book upside down?" I felt a little embarrassed. Since I had been found out, I had to tell him what my father had said. "Actually, I have an idea." "What?" Ethan bent down. He came close to her. His face was almost in front of hers. "Marry me. It's not a breach of contract." I stared at his face. I was a little distracted. I answered softly, "Yes." Ethan didn't expect me to say yes. He raised his eyebrows in confusion. I originally wanted to ask Ethan why he was hiding his identity, but the words that came out of my mouth became, "Do you like me?" Ethan was completely taken aback. Even the tips of his ears turned slightly red. He straightened up stiffly. He walked unsteadily towards the door. I was just joking. He hadn't even reached the door. His phone beeped with a particularly concerned tone. He stopped in his tracks. He took out his phone. He saw the message I had just sent. "I like you too. I've actually liked you for a long time." Ethan smiled. He turned around and saw me standing next to the bookshelf. I waved the blue notebook in my hand at him. He walked quickly over to me. He put his arms around me. I raised my hands and hugged him tightly. I thought, in the darkest moment of my life, I lost the light that shone in. I never expected. He was always by my side. That night, Jacob unexpectedly took the initiative to call me. "What the hell is wrong with you? Amelia is only looking out for your best interests. You always make her angry. Come back home." I was about to speak. A slender hand reached out from behind me. It gently covered mine. It took the phone away from me. Ethan chuckled quietly. He said, "From now on, you have to call her auntie." After hanging up the phone, I felt a little heat in the palm of my hand. I quickly withdrew my hand. That night, I fell asleep quickly, and I had a dreamless night. I told Ethan that I wanted to go to work. He was very supportive. He also introduced me to the resources and trusted people he knew. At first, they were a bit distant from me because of Ethan's identity. Later, after working together many times, he saw my abilities. He praised me highly. As the wedding date approached, Jacob couldn't sit still anymore. He ran straight to the banquet and dragged me away. I was wearing high heels. I almost sprained my ankle. I shook him off a little angrily. "What are you doing?" Jacob looked at me with impatience. He stopped in his tracks. His eyes revealed a hurt expression. "Don't be angry, okay? I couldn't find you these past few days. Do you know how worried I was? And you're still with my brother-in-law. Sigh, as long as you're back, I won't mention it again." Jacob's so-called urgency was just that he called once and sent a message. I can't help but laugh. Does he think that just sending me a message is an apology? I'm not joking with you, and you should stop looking for me. I'm marrying Ethan, not you. Jacob takes a hasty step forward. I immediately take a defensive step back. His eyes are red. His expression looks aggrieved. We've been getting along pretty well until now. If you don't like Amelia, then we can move out. Sophia is indeed my sister, if you don't like it. I can stop contacting her, okay? Footsteps came from behind. Ethan walked up behind me, reached around my waist, looking at Jacob. With a teasing expression on his face, he said, "Didn't we already talk about this? You have to call her aunt." Jacob subconsciously took a half step back, but still stared at Ethan unhappily. He said, "Younger brother-in-law, she's my fiancé." "What do you mean by this? You've only known each other for a short time. There has to be an order of precedence." Ethan sneered. His eyes held a hint of menace. "Order of precedence? My people have suffered so much at your hands, this debt. I haven't settled it with you yet." Jacob frowned, still not giving in. "What do you mean by your people? I'm her fiancé. Do you know him? How can you decide to marry him so easily? Am I not good enough for you?" I leaned back slightly, leaning in Ethan's arms. "My eyes are a little complicated. Be good to me. You said I was alone in the middle of nowhere, but you were with Sophia watching a movie. Or when my life was hanging by a thread, you were still with Sophia. Oh, do you know that Amelia is giving me a hard time and keeps saying it's for my own good?" Ethan looked down at me. His eyes were full of pain. He apologized repeatedly, saying he had come too late. Jacob couldn't refute these words. He could only keep saying, "It was my fault. Give me another chance. It won't happen again next time. Let's make up." My gaze became cold. I said calmly, "You won't get another chance." Ethan put his arm around me and turned around, leaving behind a sentence. "Don't come to the company anymore. "You're fired." Jacob stood there, looking at me for help. Every time Amelia embarrassed me, I looked to him for help, but he always pretended not to see, playing dumb between us. Afterwards, he would say, "Amelia is only looking out for you. It won't happen again." This time, I chose to turn a blind eye, turning with a cold face, following Ethan behind him. Jacob shouted in a hoarse voice, "I won't give up." From then on, Jacob was like glued to me. I couldn't get rid of him. Every day there would be a fresh bouquet of flowers at my doorstep. The card was full of sweet words, and all kinds of expensive gifts kept coming. Before, the flowers in the vase withered. I asked him to bring me another bouquet. He always said, "I was too busy, I forgot. I'll remember next time." In the past, I always looked forward to the next time, but then even a few flowers became a luxury. Now, I no longer want them, but Jacob takes the initiative to bring them over. However, Ethan throws them in the trash. Afterwards, he always says he'll buy me something better and more expensive. I'm headache about Jacob's behavior, but Ethan finds it very interesting. Every time Jacob shows up, Ethan takes the opportunity to pretend to be aggrieved, saying he's jealous. I felt I was doing something wrong, so I just let him have his way. I granted him every little wish. Luckily, Ethan wasn't a big spender. We moved into our new house soon after. We decorated it together, from the furniture and appliances to the color of the bed linen, even the knickknacks on the TV stand. We chose them together. Here's the thing. I told Ethan that when I was little, I really liked playing dress up. After hearing that, and handed over all the decision-making power to me. He even deliberately filled the walk-in closet with clothes. He said, "This way I can dress myself however I like every day." In fact, he knew in his heart, I don't like that feeling of being disrespected, and I don't want to lose the freedom to choose. Therefore, Ethan is willing to be my helper, help me step by step, prove my strength, earn the respect and recognition of my partners. Whenever I stand in one of those houses I've carefully selected, I feel as happy as a child. My incomplete childhood is being made up for by Ethan. Amelia has asked me to try some special treatments several times before. My body has become a bit weaker as a result. Although I don't feel any discomfort myself, Ethan is particularly concerned about this. Today is the time for my monthly physical examination. Ethan said that, after the meeting, he would come and pick me up and walk with me. I felt that this was too much trouble. I decided to go there first. I told him to come straight to me after the meeting. Unfortunately, I ran into Amelia at the hospital. It had been a long time. Amelia looked much thinner. In the past, when she went out, she always dressed up. She wore designer clothes. She looked down on people. Now, she was still wearing the same clothes from a few years ago. Even her bag was not the latest model. I was a little surprised, but I didn't want to get into trouble. I intend to pretend I didn't see her. I walk on the other side of the street. I've just turned around. Amelia suddenly stands up and runs towards me. She grabs my arm. I'm taken aback. "It's you. You're the one who started this. You scheming person." The people around hear the word bitch and stop in their tracks. They look over at us. Amelia's eyes are red. She stares at me like I'm her enemy. She pointed at me with her finger while crying out to the passers-by. She was very emotional. Everyone came to judge. This woman was originally my son's fiancé, but she had no shame. She ended up sleeping with my son's brother-in-law. The people around me stared at me. Their gazes pierced me like needles. I frowned as my head ached. Amelia became more and more agitated as she spoke. Not only did she do something shameful, she also sowed discord behind my back. She cut off our family's income. It's all because of her. We were kicked out of the family business. You should examine your conscience. Amelia was emotional. She patted her chest hard. You were kicked out of the family. You haven't been treated badly by your mother and me. Now you want to drive us to our deaths. The passers-by whispered among themselves. They all felt that Amelia had been wronged. Someone said, "I can't believe it. She looks so friendly. Oh my. This aunt really makes you feel for her. That woman has gone too far. Quick, film her, post it online. People should judge this kind of person." "Haha." I calmly watched them film this farce. I said in a light tone of voice, "Then you have to record the whole thing. I have never treated you harshly." I looked at Amelia. She lowered her head a little sheepishly, putting on an appearance of vulnerability. I said, "By your so-called not treating you harshly is to keep delaying the wedding date again and again. And you also demanded that I must get pregnant. I could only get married after giving birth to a son. You made me a bitter woman who yearns for marriage all day long. You also deliberately made things difficult for me. You sent me alone to a remote town to get the fertility injection. Why don't you try the feeling of a rusty needle piercing your skin, and then being abandoned in the wilderness? Or maybe you made me drink those folk remedies of unknown origin. As a result, I almost died at home. No one has found out yet. I said these words slowly, word by word. Amelia's face grew increasingly pale. The surrounding murmurs gradually turned into sighs. Everyone was talking. Isn't this asking to get pregnant before marriage? And you must give birth to a son. Is there a throne to inherit in the family? Oh my. I heard that the so-called easy pregnancy injection is particularly dangerous. It could kill someone if not done properly. And these things are usually only available in very remote places. The medical conditions there are also particularly poor. This is obviously deliberately making things difficult for people. That girl really makes you feel sorry for her. If it were me, I would have already fallen out with her. Seeing that things were not going well, Amelia quickly got up from the floor. She said, "I'm doing this for her own good. What do you understand? Besides, my son will never marry someone who cannot bear children. It's been so long. You just can't." Her words came one after the other. They forced all the pent-up emotions out of me. I was so angry I wanted to laugh. I didn't want to continue this pointless argument with her. I turned to leave. Suddenly, I heard a warning. "Be careful." Before I could react, my back was hit hard by a rigid object. I lost my balance. I fell forward. Luckily, I wasn't wearing high heels, but it still hurt a lot. I was about to stand up on my own when I suddenly saw a familiar pair of shoes running towards me. Before long, Ethan was on one knee, picking me up from the ground. I was held tightly in his arms. He rarely showed his emotions like this. I had never seen him so angry before. Ethan's voice was cold as ice. "I told you, don't touch her." As soon as Amelia saw Ethan, she turned around and tried to escape, but was stopped by the security guard and was then taken to the police station. As a result, the simple checkup turned into a full-body checkup. When Ethan returned with the results, I had already been assigned to a hospital room to rest. I was about to say that I was fine when Ethan suddenly hugged me. I smiled and gently pushed his shoulder. "Don't worry, I don't need to be hospitalized. You see, I'm not in any trouble." Ethan rested his head next to my neck. I felt a little wet. I wanted to push his hand away, but stopped. I reached out and hugged him tightly. I thought he was just nervous, so I gently reassured him. Ethan looked up. His eyes were a little red. He smiled. "We're having a baby." The baby came suddenly. I froze for a moment. I touched my stomach. I was a little dazed. Ethan gently touched my head. He said, "The doctor said you're not in good health. You just had a fall. You need to stay in the hospital for 2 days to recuperate." Seeing that I didn't respond, Ethan bent down and looked me in the eye. He asked softly, "What's wrong? If you don't want the baby now, I'll go and talk to the doctor, you decide." "Okay." I came back to my senses and looked up at Ethan. "No, I'm just a little dazed. I do want this baby." Ethan's eyes were firm and said sincerely, "Don't you worry. I will take care of you and the baby. I have already arranged everything for the wedding. As long as you say yes, we can get married anytime." I snuggled into his arms. My heart was filled with a long-lost sense of happiness. I whispered, "It's just a pity that we can't go to that restaurant anymore." Ethan gave me a gentle nudge on the nose and said, "Who says we can't buy it? I'll go buy it." Ethan had just left for a while. The door was pushed open. "You're back so soon." I looked up. My smile froze. Jacob was standing in the doorway. He looked a little uneasy. He saw the disappointment in my eyes. He gripped the door handle. Then he forced a smile. He said, "I'm sorry. I never thought Amelia would treat you like this. I didn't know you two got along so well. I ignored you. I'm sorry. And Sophia, I've already deleted her. I won't contact her again. Can you give me another chance? If you'll come back to me, I promise I'll treat you well. I'll support you in everything you want to do. I'll never let anyone hurt you again. By the way, you always wanted to get married. When you're discharged from the hospital, we'll get married." "Okay," Jacob's voice caught as he spoke. He gripped the doorknob tightly. His knuckles turned white, but he never dared to take the next step. I let out a small sigh and said to him, "Jacob, it's over between us. I didn't want to get married with you, and I never wanted to force you to get married. You never understood what I really wanted. Now I've found someone I like. We're very happy." Jacob's gaze fell on my hand, which was stroking my belly. After a while, he lowered his head and stood quietly. Tears slid down his face. Then he looked up and looked deeply into my eyes and said, "I'm sorry. I wish you happiness." I smiled at him. "Well, you too." Although the wedding preparations were short, nothing was left out. Ethan personally selected the decorations according to my preferences. He also decorated the wedding room himself. On that day, I wore a custom-made wedding dress. Petals fell in profusion. It was as if they were paving a path for me. I smiled as I walked towards the man I had liked since I was a young girl. Ethan was wearing a sharp black suit. His eyes were red. He had a gentle smile on his face. Under the guidance of the officiant, we exchanged rings. We promised the gods that we would be together for the rest of our lives. In the early stages of pregnancy, Ethan would still work with me. As it got later, my body's reactions became more and more obvious. Ethan then switched to working online. He stayed at home with me every day. I always felt that he was too nervous. He always said that I didn't care enough about myself. Watching him sit in the spacious office, facing a wall of dolls in the meeting, it felt a little funny and a little suffocating. After the baby was born, Ethan hired an aunt to help with daily life. I was bored at home. He mysteriously brought back a gift box. The box was beautifully wrapped. I looked at it curiously and asked, "Why is this box so big? What is it?" Ethan gently placed the gift box on the carpet in front of me. "It was a gift. I've wanted to give it to you for a long time. I only found it recently. Does Ethan still have something that he can't find?" I reached out and untied the ribbon. The box opened up. Inside was a little nest. A small puppy was quietly lying there. It wasn't some expensive breed, but it looked exactly like the one I had lost before. My eyes sparkled. I looked at Ethan, then at the puppy. This moment, it was as if I had gone back in time to the moment when my mother gave me Duo. The puppy in front of me. Even the location of the birthmark was exactly the same as Duo's. After the initial surprise, I felt a surge of emotion. I threw myself into Ethan's arms. I cried softly. Ethan gave a small smile. He wrapped his arms around me. He gently stroked the top of my head. He said, "Here's something you lost. I found it for you."